life lived for others will never fade. All through the world still His presence remains. Teachings of peace, an exemplar of love. 100 years now have passed since He's gone. Abdu'l-Baha. Just like the sunlight, His words lit the hearts, traveling the lands to ignite in us a spark, a spark of love. Care, peace, and service, justice and grace, friendship, respect for the human race. This virtuous station, this mighty great law, live in the title of Abdu'l-Baha. Live in the title of Abdu'l-Baha.
Welcome to the commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the Ascension of Abdu'l-Baha. Abbas Effendi, son of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith, was given many titles by his father, but he himself chose Abdu'l-Baha, meaning servant of the glory, as his preferred moniker, for it encapsulated the essence of his personage during his lifetime. In his own words, he states, "My name is Abdu'l-Baha. My identity is Abdu'l-Baha. My qualification is Abdu'l-Baha. My reality is Abdu'l-Baha. My praise is Abdu'l-Baha. Thraldom to the blessed perfection is my glorious, refulgent diadem, and servitude to all the human race is my perpetual religion." His station as the center of the covenant protecting his father's nascent faith from schism remains the most unique in the annals of all religious history. First-hand accounts reflect a life dedicated to humanity through the unfoldment of this new revelation of his high and revered station, in company with his tender humility, his unconditional love and generosity towards all, especially the poor and downtrodden, his patient and just nature towards those who vehemently opposed and undermined him and his father's cause. He is the true exemplar for Baha'is and all people worldwide. At this hour marking the centenary of his passing from this darksome world, we commemorate his legacy of service through his life's work to unfold the principles laid down by Baha'u'llah for the advancement and prosperity of all mankind, principles including the equality of men and women, the elimination of all forms of prejudice and economic disparity, the recognition of the oneness of God, humanity, and all religions, and ultimately that a life of service is one of true worship. May we all strive that, like him, our actions may be beautiful prayers.
One of the things that Abdu'l-Baha did repeatedly during his visit to the United States was emphasize the oneness of mankind, the oneness of humanity, in particular the equality of blacks and whites. And he went beyond that in many ways, on many occasions, to point out the importance of an appreciation of diversity. In the spring of 1912, Abdu'l-Baha hosted at the home of Vafa and Safa Kenny 24 boys between the ages of 12 and 14. He had encountered them a few days earlier while he and his entourage were walking to the Bowery section of New York City, where Abdu'l-Baha spoke to some impoverished men and had given them some encouragement and even had handed out some charitable donations to them. The children, however, that had encountered his entourage had wanted to accompany Abdu'l-Baha, and that was impossible because of the circumstances at the time, but Mrs. Kenny invited them to her home for a few days later. They arrived, and Abdu'l-Baha greeted each boy with a hand clasp and a word of encouragement and smiles and even laughter as they were coming into the room. Towards the end of the group, there was a 12 or 13-year-old black boy. And he was greeted immediately and enthusiastically, with particular enthusiasm, by Abdu'l-Baha, who to the entire room said, "Ah, here is a black rose." And he said it loudly enough so that everyone in the room heard it. And this brought special attention to this young boy, this young black boy, in a way that had never been experienced by most of the white boys who were in the room. And so there was a certain curiosity piqued in a positive way about this black boy who had accompanied them to visit Abdu'l-Baha. Now, immediately after their arrival, Abdu'l-Baha had ordered some chocolates, some mixed chocolates to provide as refreshments for the boys. And when they arrived, he got up and actually personally went around the room and handed some chocolates to each of the boys. And then he sat back down, and there were a few chocolates left in the box. And then there was this dark nougat that he took out of the box, walked over to the black boy, put his arm on the shoulder of the black boy, and took the chocolate and just held it up to his face. And turning to the rest of the boys with a quick glance, showing a delight, a happiness in doing this. He said nothing, but the message was clear. The message was that, you see, you love these dark chocolates. And perhaps if you look at this black boy in the same way, you'll discover that you can love him too as your brother. And the message was not lost on the boys. You know, an observer who was there, an adult at the time, noticed that all of the boys were looking suddenly at the black boy in ways that they had never, with attitudes of appreciation that they had never had before. So this appreciation of diversity, rather than hiding it, but actually highlighting it, as we do in a beautiful garden that has a diverse array of flowers, is something that Abdu'l-Baha did way back in 1912, when such a thing was completely foreign to American society.
You must manifest complete love and affection toward all mankind. Do not exalt yourselves above others, but consider all as your equals, recognizing them as the servants of God. Know that God is compassionate toward all. Therefore, love all from the depths of your heart. Prefer all religionists before yourself. Be filled with love for every race, and be kind toward the people of all nationalities.
Abdu'l-Baha, as we know, was a perfect example and an inspiration to Baha'is on all the laws and all the principles. But one of the principles that he exemplified, pioneered, championed, and encouraged was the equality of women and men, the balance of the feminine and the masculine. He helped the Baha'i community understand it better. It was a concept, particularly at the turn of the century, that the world was just beginning to grapple with. And he explained to the Baha'i community this concept of a bird society being a bird with two wings. On the one hand is the wing of the male or masculine, and on the other hand is the female or women. And he talked about both of these qualities, both of these genders needing to have balance and needing to have coordination and needing to work in collaboration and in harmony with each other so that the bird of civilization could fly and reach its fullest potential. He spoke eloquently about how we are not there yet, how humanity has been flopping around on the ground, handicapped for most of its existence, and how we don't really know what equality of women and men look like. But he gave us some clues. He explained that men needed to champion equality of women and men, that men would be unable to reach the greatness which might be theirs unless there was the equality of women and men. He also unequivocally encouraged women to take leadership positions, to have occupations, and to engage in society at all levels, while at the same time valuing motherhood and talking about its importance. But he said that until women are in all areas of society, including law and politics, world peace is impossible. And then he saw to it that women were elevated into the ranks of global leadership. For example, in 1902, a time when women were not equal at all, he appointed an American woman to serve as his emissary to the Shah of Iran to demand the end of the persecution of Baha'is. Women at that time could have easily been dismissed, particularly by the Shah of Iran, but Abdu'l-Baha saw it fit to appoint a woman in that role. In another example of elevating women to leadership, Abdu'l-Baha asked an American gynecologist to go to Iran to be the first American gynecologist, doctor actually, in Iran. And when she was there, she also established a girls' school that became very famous in Iran. So the fact that he asked a woman of her stature to go to Iran, a place that didn't look at women in a particularly elevated sense. I don't know if they had seen women physicians before, was an incredible symbol of his faith in women, his belief in women, and his advocacy for women to be in leadership. That example has trickled through over the last 100+ years, and it still exists in the Baha'i community today. He set that standard, he set that example, and all of us in the Baha'i community, men and women, are struggling to aspire to that example and to really achieve the equality of women and men.
Montfort Mills was a lawyer in New York City. When Abdu'l-Baha was visiting there in 1912, he asked him to teach him how to pray. The following morning, Montfort Mills arrived at Abdu'l-Baha's apartment and found him already in prayer, and Montfort knelt with him, and the minutes went by, and Montfort would pray for his father, his mother, his aunt, his cousin, and then more minutes went by, so he prayed for the president and other heads of state, and then he noticed that the wall had a crack in it, and then he heard the birds that were chirping at dawn, and he began to get irritated. He was a lawyer, and he was used to things happening fast, and he looked across, and he saw Abdu'l-Baha enveloped in a very powerful aura of spirituality and humility, and this tore down his own veils, and he was able to settle down into a deep state of prayer. This state of prayer that Montfort Mills went into, because Montfort was an ordinary human being, is something that we are all capable of. And one thing we can do in imitation of Baha'u'llah, of Abdu'l-Baha, is to deepen our own prayer. Abdu'l-Baha's prayer was characterized also by an outcome. Once he was done with prayer, he served, and this service was carried out in a spirit of great humility. So you probably know that every Friday people would gather in his courtyard in Akka, and he would assist them, and then after mosque, there would be poor people waiting for him outside, and that throughout the city of Akka he would visit the sick and the indigent, no matter what religion they were or background or what their condition was. I'm sure you know the story of the Westerner who wanted to imitate Abdu'l-Baha, and he sent her to a home of somebody who was really in bad shape, smelled very bad and all that, and she just couldn't do it. And Abdu'l-Baha expressed some disappointment to her because of that. This extreme humility that Abdu'l-Baha fed with prayer is something that allowed him to be universally loving to everybody. Abdu'l-Baha's humility towards all people was such that he could listen to you no matter what your point of view is, no matter if he agreed with you or not. He could listen to you without surrender. He had a strong sense of self, but he had a strong, deep humility that stemmed from his practice of prayer. And this allowed him to be universally loving. He never took offense. And sometimes he did give offense because he taught things that people didn't want to hear, but he himself was never personally offended by any point of view. This universality allowed him to have a feeling of unity with other human beings. It was grounded in his deep practice of prayer and his constant connection to service. Some of you may have seen the opening of the House of Worship recently in Vanuatu, the Baha'i House of Worship. Shoghi Effendi said the Baha'i houses of worship in the future would be surrounded by hospitals, schools, and other service activities because, Shoghi Effendi said, the prayer had to be connected to the service. And with Abdu'l-Baha, the prayer, the humility, and the service were of a single piece. And this allowed him to be universal in his approach to people. And so when people talk about unity and Abdu'l-Baha, it's not that he put people together and agreed with everybody, or he didn't have a sense of self and he was frightened and all of this. It's that he had a very humble posture towards everybody he met, and it was a posture born of prayer and filled with service. So he wasn't offended by any views and could dialogue and interact with everybody. And this is something actually that we can aspire towards. This practice of deep purposive prayer that results in service that's carried out in a spirit of humility is the basis for the oneness of humankind. Everybody has different opinions. Everybody has different experiences. The values of all people the experiences of all people are valid and are what they have lived. So to achieve this kind of oneness, the well of prayer is something we can all draw on, and to have a universal sense of service with humility towards each other, as Abdu'l-Baha did.
In 1912, Abdu'l-Baha traveled throughout the length and breadth of the United States of America to bring a message of peace. During his travels, a high official of the US government approached him and said, "Could you please give me some advice on how I can best serve my country?" Abdu'l-Baha's response is really interesting. He said, "If you want to serve both your country and humanity, the best thing you can do is to export the principles of federalism upon which your government is based to the rest of the world, because this will be the solution to humanity's problems, and humanity desperately needs to move towards a global federal system." So that was interesting advice. What's fascinating, and very few people are aware of, is that almost 100 years later, it was actually 99 years later, that during the financial crisis that started in Europe and then spread around the world. So during the global financial crisis, a member of a European central bank flew to the United States in order to get advice from American officials about how to resolve the crisis, the debt crisis in Europe. And fascinatingly enough, here's the advice that the American officials gave him. Instead of pulling out their spreadsheets and saying, well, you need to tinker with money this way and that way and put this policy and that policy into effect. No, what they did was they handed to them a copy of the Articles of Confederation of 1781 that were the precursor to the US Constitution. And they gave them a copy of the US Constitution that came to being in 1789. And they said, take these two documents home and study them, because we too in the United States were a confederation, a loose confederation of 13 states, just like you are in the European Union. And we too had exactly the same problems you did, including a massive debt crisis. And it was one of the huge drivers that caused us to integrate. We realized that ultimately the only solution to our debt crisis problem and to our other problems was to further unify and integrate and move from a loose confederation of states to a federation of the United States of America. You too need to do the same thing. Go home, study these two documents. Isn't that interesting? Almost 100 years after Abdu'l-Baha gave his advice, these officials unwittingly, it's not like they knew that Abdu'l-Baha had said this, but it had become so blindingly obvious, I guess, to them, that this was the only route to success. And here they were giving the EU official, the European Central Bank official, this advice. Now, you will, of course, all note that the European Union still has not moved to being a federation. It is moving painstakingly in fits and starts towards that. But really the solution to their problems, their multiple problems, will be that, and the solution to all the world's problems, including climate change and the pandemic, will be to move towards a world federal government. And this is a reflection of Abdu'l-Baha's advice that it is time for humanity to move towards a viable new system of global governance.
Oh bondadoso Señor, tú has creado a toda la humanidad del mismo linaje. Has decretado que todos pertenezcan a la misma familia. En tu santa presencia, todos son tus siervos, y toda la humanidad se cobija bajo tu tabernáculo. Todos se han reunido alrededor de tu mesa de munificencia. Todos están iluminados por la luz de tu providencia.
Oh Dios, tú eres bondadoso con todos. Das sustento a todos. Ofreces asilo a todos. Confieres vida a todos. Tú has dotado a todos y a cada uno de talento y facultades, y todos están sumergidos en el océano de tu misericordia.
Oh bondadoso Señor, une a todos, haz que las religiones concuerden y haz de las naciones una sola, a fin de que se vean unas a otras como una sola familia, y consideren toda la humanidad como un solo hogar, que vivan todos en perfecta armonía.
Oh Dios, levanta el estandarte de la unidad de la humanidad.
Oh Dios, establece la paz mayor.
Oh Dios, une firmemente los corazones entre sí.
Oh Padre bondadoso, Dios, alegra nuestros corazones con la fragancia de tu amor. Ilumina nuestros ojos con la luz de tu guía. Deleita nuestros oídos con la melodía de tu palabra. Y ampáranos a todos en la fortaleza de tu providencia.
Tú eres el poderoso y el fuerte. Tú eres el perdonador y tú eres quien pasa por alto las flaquezas de toda la humanidad. Abdu'l-Baha.
Service is an integral part of Baha'i life. Abdu'l-Baha says, all effort and exertion put forth by man from the fullness of his heart is worship, if it be prompted by the highest motives and will do service to humanity. This is worship, to serve mankind and to minister to the needs of the people. And service to humanity is an act that springs from the love of all humanity and the recognition of its oneness. In his selfless service to humanity, Abdu'l-Baha sacrificed comfort and rest, and would often give away his own food or clothes. While imprisoned in Akka, Israel, he would nurse the sick and dying prisoners with his own hands. In World War I, Abdu'l-Baha kept busy tending to the needs of the people around him, even going to the extent to personally organize an intensive agricultural operation to supply wheat to countless people in Haifa and Akka, not only to supply Baha'is, but also everyone of all religions and backgrounds. Abdu'l-Baha's life of servitude offers the perfect example of how the spirit of humility and service to humanity is considered worship. He says, work done in the spirit of service is the highest form of worship. Putting effort with pure intentions in one's work towards the betterment of the world is a way of worshiping God. Today, millions of Baha'is and their friends all around the world work and accompany each other in numerous forms of selfless service, inspired and guided by Abdu'l-Baha's example. Everyone of all ages and life situations participate and serve, be it community building, participating in devotional gatherings, helping and empowering junior youth, providing spiritual education for children, praying for someone, and through social actions. This and much more brings joy to the world and exemplifies the essence of worship.
هو الأبهى إلهي إلهي هذا عبد توجه إلى ملكوت رحمانيتك وتوكل إلى جبروت فردانيتك واستأنس بالنار الموقدة في سدرة وحدانيتك واحتيا بروح المناجاة في ظل كلمة ربانيتك أي ربي ثبت قدمه على أمرك واشرح صدره بنورك
وبشر روحه بفتوحك وانشر به ذكرك وأنطقه بثنائك وألبسه رداء الخلوص في أمرك وأدخله في جنة الخلود بلطفك إنك أنت المقتدر الرؤوف الكريم الرحيم عين عين
is the all-glorious. O God, my God, lowly and tearful, I raise my suppliant hands to Thee, and cover my face in the dust of that threshold of Thine, exalted above the knowledge of the learned, and the praise of all that glorify Thee. Graciously look upon Thy servant, humble and lowly, at Thy door, with the glances of the eye of Thy mercy, and immerse him in the ocean of Thine eternal grace. Lord, he is a poor and lowly servant of Thine, enthralled and imploring Thee, captive in Thy hand, praying fervently to Thee, trusting in Thee, in tears before Thy face, calling to Thee and beseeching Thee, saying, O Lord my God, give me Thy grace to serve Thy loved ones. Strengthen me in my servitude to Thee. Illumine my brow with the light of adoration in Thy court of holiness, and of prayer to Thy kingdom of grandeur. Help me to be selfless at the heavenly entrance of Thy gate, and aid me to be detached from all things within Thy holy precincts. Lord, give me to drink from the chalice of selflessness. With its robe clothe me, and in its ocean immerse me. Make me as dust in the pathway of Thy loved ones, and grant that I may offer up my soul for the earth, ennobled by the footsteps of Thy chosen ones in Thy path. O Lord of glory in the highest, with this prayer doth Thy servant call Thee, at dawntide and in the night season. Fulfill his heart's desire. O Lord, illumine his heart, gladden his bosom, kindle his light, that he may serve Thy cause and Thy servants. Thou art the bestower, the pitiful, the most bountiful, the gracious, the merciful, the compassionate.